harmless. He just wants to play.
It's a strange way to play.
I knew. I was fully aware. All the time. What? I couldn't help myself. I fought it with all my power.
My name is George.
My name is Devin.
And this is Medicinema, your healthy dose of film.
On this podcast, we will discuss 2 movies each episode with spoilers in an effort to dig deeper and hopefully provide you with some new insights and perspectives on the art form that we all love so much. By the end of each episode, we'll prescribe you your films for the next one so everyone can be prepared for their next appointment.
On this first episode, however, things are gonna go down differently. Not only did you guys not have the chance yet to take in your medicine, but also we wanted to provide you with a quick overview of our tastes by briefly and spoiler-free talking about 3 of our favorite movies each. As an additional creative exercise, we also decided to try and introduce each other's recommendation. So tell me, Devin, what's the first movie that I recommended?
Your first movie is 1997's horror comedy Funny Games by Michael Haneke. Arguably one of the most recognizable Austrian directors, and his equally arguable most well-known film, the film blends mastercraft art house cinematography with Haneke's signature brutalism, here turned up to 10. These 2 aspects really showcase our own duality in tastes, which I think makes this an excellent first pick.
I think it's fascinating that you see this movie as a horror comedy. To me, it's not that funny of a movie, but I could see the point. I chose this movie for quite a few different reasons. First of all, obviously it's a representation of where I come from. And additionally, I also do love Michael Haneke. He's the first director of my home country where I realized, oh man, Austria can actually also make movies. I chose it not because it is necessarily my favorite Haneke film. However, it is the most accessible and wide known, I'd say, so it would be easier for viewers to chime in, even if they are not provided with a vast catalog of Austrian film history. It is, to me, a meta critique on the horror film genre itself. In a way, you could argue it's kind of the European art house reply to something like Scream, which only released like 1 year earlier, so it's kind of a sister movie to that. I think it's interesting that you call this one extra brutal, because yes, whilst the movie feels very extreme, when really thinking about it, the interesting thing to me is one of the things I really love about film is that it doesn't really show that much of that brutality. It is really the concept and the things it does with you in your mind that is so brutal about it, but showing violence is really not that big of a part of this movie, which anytime a movie can do much whilst showing little is something that I hugely love about the creative craft of filmmaking. How did you enjoy Funny Games?
I enjoyed it quite a lot. It's been a while since, I've really sat down and done a good deep dive into it. Probably about a year or 2. I think you were saying about the violence isn't shown. All of the violence is off screen, correct? I don't think they show any real hits on screen in the movie, correct?
I think there's like a few minor instances of on-screen violence, but really the big ones are off-screen, yes.
Yeah, I think just touching on the brutalism thing you're saying, I'm only fairly been recently aware of Hanukkah. I have seen the movie a long time ago, but it wasn't until meeting you and doing what we do that I've really seen more of his films. And this is just, I think, compared to his other movies, it is more traditional horror in that sense.
Mhm.
So I think that's why I say the brutalism is so much more turned up. And even though you don't see it, the implication is so strong in this film, and that's what it's running on. And that's a really great technique to this guy have been mastering is the idea of implication, which seems to be prevalent in a lot of his movies.
Yes, absolutely.
But the comedy aspect, I called it, a horror comedy. That might just be me. I laugh at everything. I think a lot of really not funny things are funny, and I laugh at some inappropriate times. Just there's a lot of moments in this movie that are jarring in how fast they happen, and that is part of its own brutality. But to me, that jarring nature sometimes just cracks me up.
It definitely plays with your emotions. Like I think it's one of those movies where at a certain point it might be difficult to really comprehend, or not even comprehend, to really know where to go with your emotions, how to truly react to this moment. So it's kind of an instinct reaction to just let it out with a laugh, I believe.
That's an absolutely great way to put the reason I laugh 90% of the time. It's some therapy I wasn't ready for. Oh man, yeah, I like this movie a lot. I think we should probably bring up just real quick that there's two versions of this film,
Oh yeah.
and I've only ever seen the American version. Being an American, I was ignorant to the fact that there even was an original Austrian version. But I've heard from many people that they are pretty damn interchangeable, actually.
Yes, this is one of the additional fantastic parts that I love about this movie, with it being a meta commentary on particularly the American horror film scene. I think it's kind of perfect that Hollywood wanted to make a remake of this film, and Haneke, in his ways, kind of decided to make it himself and just shot for shot recreate the movie pretty much like a carbon copy, just with American actors and changing the language. I think it's kind of the perfect final meta joke about the horror concept and Hollywood itself, just going ahead and being like, yeah, that's the one US remake I got, is the movie that is pointing fingers at Hollywood.
I want to get into that in a second a little bit, because that's something that I come from a much more horror-based background. So I really want to know what that means, that it's pointing its fingers at itself. But I do want to say one more thing about it being a remake, is that I've also heard, not from any native Austrians, but I have heard that a lot of people prefer the American version because of the actors.
Yeah, I've heard that before. It's almost like, it almost seems illegal to say this as an Austrian, but if I would have to choose, I might even also choose the US version. There's one of the villain characters, let's put it that way, where I prefer the acting of the American version. But yeah, they are pretty interchangeable. I don't really see.
I have a feeling I think I know which one you mean too. Yeah, because that guy's pretty incredible in that movie. So yeah, tell me more a little about what you're talking about. This comparing it to something like Scream, which I also only actually saw recently, which is a big blind spot in my horror life. But yeah, why do you say this is such an inward looking parody of horror?
It's kind of difficult to really get a lot into that without going into spoiler territory. So that might be a discussion for the future, but I'll briefly touch on it. I think the way the main antagonist, breaks the fourth wall throughout the movie and directly addresses the viewer, asking us questions about, is this what you expect from this movie? Is this what you expect from this genre? Why are you basically even sitting here and watching this? Is this something to be celebrated? And if so, then why even? Is, I guess, the brief explanation.
No, it's really, really good. So I was trying to find a note that I did not write down, apparently. I think it's really interesting how much this movie has actually been regurgitated into the horror ecosystem. We're only really seeing them come out a lot more now. But what this movie did for me was less touch on, what horror movies mean and stuff, but touched on the idea of politeness and of inner socio dealings horror. What is the like limit of just dealing with another person and like a person's like polite limit? And we're actually just seeing a lot of those movies kind of come out now. I think this is where I wish I would have my note. I think it was 2021's Speak No Evil was very reminiscent of this movie in the way that it dealt with politeness and how far you can push that. But I think there's a lot of movies coming out right now that take this movie as an inspiration to keep making more films like this.
Yeah, it does feel ahead of its time. That's kind of one of the things that I love about it.
Yeah, this was a great pick.
I guess that means we can move on to one of your recommendations. I'm gonna start off by talking about Psycho Goreman. It is a movie with heavy practical effects work. There's a lot of gore, bodysuits, makeup, puppetry, model work, and I think even a little bit of stop motion in there. It has a very dry sense of humor and some amazing deadpan delivery of pretty insane dialogue. If I would have to guess, then I would say you watched this with your daughter, and it's collectively one of your favorite movies. A little girl having all the power in the world in a movie that has so many aspects that you love about filmmaking just seems like the perfect we are rewatching this together on a loop movie.
That's really, really funny. I have actually never watched this with my daughter.
Oh, really?
I have not. No. It's actually never occurred to me to show this to my daughter. Man, I think I might have to do that. I think I'd have to look at some of the content of what the movies in there, some of the other non-violent content. But no, that makes a lot of sense. I could see that. I could definitely see why you would say that. This movie's just fantastic. You already mentioned the suit work and stuff. That's, my big attraction to this film. It's just all the suit work, all the very reminiscent of Power Rangers on drugs, swearing. And I'm really here for that.
Yeah, the Power Rangers on drugs swearing really is a perfect summarization of this. There's a lot of campiness to this, which I know you can enjoy a lot. There's some great creature designs, like a big variety of it even. It's not really like one consistent design, but a lot of different creatures, and within the story it makes sense that they would all look differently. So I enjoyed that very much.
Yeah, this movie's just kind of oozing with creativity, which is that's my version of art house. Is just admit there were a lot of artists in the house.
That's incredible. Psycho Goreman 2020, the art house film.
Yeah, the art house movie. They might have even shown. I know they did a couple festival circuits, clearly horror ones, but I don't know if they showed it Cannes or TIFF or anything.
They might have shown it at like the midnight screenings at TIFF.
Yeah. South by Southwest for sure.
I enjoyed this. I do, however, have to say there's where a lot of the differences in our tastes come in. Whilst enjoying practical effects and, having appreciation for gore and well-made bodysuits and all of that stuff, I just didn't vibe with the humor all that much. And there's just certain aspects of the movie that really put me off. I wasn't really a big fan of the original song that's happening in this one. I like the way it is used. I get the story element it provides, but yeah, just the sound of it and hearing it twice didn't help my enjoyment all that much.
Yeah, I won't lie. The song is a little off-putting. The little girl main actress, I love her. I think she does a really great job. She's definitely a make it or break it moment for a lot of people for this movie. And it is crass. It is a very crass film, very vulgar, reflective of my taste.
And I think often with these kind of movies, the novelty of the concept wears off for me at a certain point. And if at that point the story isn't fleshed out enough, or there are not enough new ideas coming in to take over my attention, I kind of get lost along the way. And this also happened to me here, where the first half I was really into it, but then the novelty of all those beautiful, costumes kind of wore off, and I felt a little left behind.
Yeah, I won't lie. That's definitely another shortcoming for this film for a lot of people. It's pretty colors to me. I thought it was great.
Mhm.
I could sit and watch a 5-hour extended cut of this movie. But I'm really into a thing called tokusatsu, which is basically Japanese live action suitmation type stuff, and it's a pretty common problem amongst all of those type of things, is that flashy stuff, little story.
Mhm.
So I definitely respect that view. Your second film is the 2021 Joachim Trier film Worst Person in the World. And though I don't remember this as well as I'd like to, I do know that I did not jive with this one. This movie is aimed at a more specific age or group of people that I just don't necessarily think I quite fit into. How would you best describe this film?
Yeah, you actually pointed at something that I wanted to get into anyways. This is very much, to me, a film that is very relatable, to use that word. And I think it is to many, many people. At least that's the experience I had talking to other people about this movie. It is, however, very much aimed, as you pointed out, at a specific group of people. It helps if you are European. It helps if you have experiences living in walkable cities. It helps if you are somewhat, I guess, white upper class. If any of those things really, apply to your life, then I think there's a lot in this movie to really get out of. It deals with where to go with your life, what to do with your creative ambitions, and just feels very heartfelt to me. The main reason I wanted to talk about this one, whilst I wanted to talk about Michael Haneke and his qualities in funny games, the reason I recommended Worst Person is because it is written by Eskil Vogt, longtime collaborator with the director Joachim Trier, and at this point also director in his own regard, directing 2 of his own scripts. And he absolutely is one of my favorite writers. I love the realness he brings to the characters, to all of the moments they go through, and at the same time, the boldness he has to, just like in this movie, even when telling a pretty grounded and real story about people just going through life, they don't shy away from breaking out of reality for a moment if the energy or the emotion calls for it of the moment, to go into a surreal, slightly magical world and really use additional ways of storytelling that filmmaking provides and that you couldn't do on stage or anything like that, for example. It really plays with the possibilities the medium has to offer.
This movie definitely walks around the proverbial room. It is constantly in motion. It's, I think, really well placed, and even its poster is, the woman running right on the front, running through the street. You can even see it in the poster that she's running. This movie travels a lot in its sense of like having a lot of locations and her running from issues and stuff throughout the movie. I really wish I would remember the movie a little better. It's been a long time since I saw it. I just know that it didn't connect to me, but it's really interesting always to look into, another world and see other people's experiences. Just sometimes it can be hard to watch and hard to connect with.
Yeah, to me, it's also an interesting film due to the fact that there's quite a few age chapters, if you want to call them that. Um, there's quite the characters have quite a variety in age, and the experiences they have to go through range from the worst to the best, really. And I can definitely see myself returning to this movie a few years down the line and having had different experiences and connecting to different parts of this film, which is always something that I hold highly. The film has quite a few additional smaller themes, like the differences in expectations of relationships and how one can grow apart. It plays with power dynamics in relationships, but also just in general. Yeah, I just, people should check this out. There's a good chance you'll love it. Maybe you're more on Devin's side of the coin, but either way, to me, both Joachim Trier and in particular the work of Eskil Vogt is just something very special.
I will agree with you about Eskil's work. I was a huge fan of one of his films, and I'm a fan of when he writes often in this stuff. Thelma.
Mm-hmm.
I really liked that movie a lot. I think for me, a lot of times it's bringing a supernatural element into any film will really escalate it for me. But this movie, I think, is made for a certain demographic of people, and I think that for those people, this movie's probably a really hard look, and it's a good thing to have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess that brings us to the next movie on the list. Another Devin recommendation and a wild movie. Planet of the Vampires, 1965. It is it is a sci-fi film that, to me, as an absolute newbie on this part of cinema history, somewhat feels like it is in the spirit of Star Trek. Correct me if I'm wrong. It uses a vast amount of practical effects again. It, in many aspects, has aged fantastically. There's a lot of work that still looks amazing in this movie that would look horrible if it was a straight up year 2000 sci-fi and everything was done in CGI. But at the same time, you, I guess, can feel some of the budgetarian constraints this movie probably faced. In particular, if you pay attention to a lot of the set designs and how they might repeat throughout the movie despite claiming it's all different rooms and trying to make it feel like it's a way bigger set than it actually is.
So, I mean, I'm going to first, I have to nerd out and say the comparison to Star Trek, I'm shaking. I'm visibly shaking. No, I'm a huge Star Trek nerd, so I'm like, that's not what it's like at all. But no, it's I'm a big fan of, classic sci-fi even before Star Trek's time and stuff. And this is very 70s. This is a 70s ass film. I don't even know if it is 70s. I think it's actually...
It is 65.
65, yeah. So, I mean, there you go, 60s. It is a lot of things. Gorgeous in color. This movie uses so many purples and pinks that I feel like we're really ahead of its time in lighting and stuff. It's what a lot of people would call a spaghetti sci-fi. It was this Italian-made movie that has English actors, it's got German actors, it's got a French actor, I think. Most of these people didn't speak the same language on set. They just dubbed over the ones they needed to dub for whatever release they're doing. But I think for me, this movie's really big pull is that it is heavily theorized this movie is the inspiration for Alien.
Oh, yeah, I can see that.
There's a lot of literally almost shot for shot moments where this movie is basically Alien. Ridley Scott has, up and down denied it or whatever and said, what, I don't know. That I don't see that. But the screenwriter of Alien has been very also directly, no, I absolutely love that movie. And this Alien was an homage to that. So, how much do we know about how much it really is inspired or not? But that's why I love this movie, is because I think it's just a really strong predecessor to modern sci-fi.
Yeah, that's a really interesting aspect you brought up there with the inspiration, particularly with writer-director duos. I think it's always fascinating if both of them have a different vision of what the movie exactly is that they just created together. Because sometimes those, views on the artwork that they created differ vastly. I know that one example of this would be a Social Network, actually, where if you ask Sorkin about what Social Network means, you might get a very different answer than if you ask Fincher what it all means. And it's just such an interesting insight to the fact that film is such a collaborative artwork. It exists sometimes with like indie animation stuff, but barely ever is a film just really this clear vision by one individual, despite author's theory and everything. And yeah, that's super interesting that they don't agree if this was the inspiration for Alien.
I'm inclined to go with the screenwriter, but that's just because I have a personal vendetta against Ridley Scott.
Yeah, going quickly over some of the qualities of Planet of the Vampires. What an amazing title, by the way. The set designs and costumes had, to me, they seem like a clear vision by someone or a team. It all seemed to fit together, and I highly appreciate that in the art design.
I feel like their outfits look like the X-Men outfits from the early X-Men movies.
Yeah.
The black and the yellow. Mm-hmm. They're just terrible suits. They're just terrible costumes.
There's a lot of love for the craft here and a lot of understanding of the craft. Little sets get extended well with forced perspective and model work. There's harsh lighting and mist when they are trying to obstruct our view of some certain details that one maybe shouldn't pick up on. And it's very well done in the way where it guides your eyes to the things it wants you to pay attention. And yeah, that's just fantastic work in that regards. Again, similar to Psycho Gorman, I wasn't too invested in the story. But I definitely have a lot of appreciation for the artwork that you can see on display here. And I definitely understand why you hold that movie highly. Was this by any chance a childhood favorite of yours?
No, not at all. I am really into classical sci-fi, whether it be Pulp Fiction novels, which, the really thin old penny or cheap sci-fi books and stuff from the 60s and even 50s. Whether it's those or it's like the Twilight Zone or old American radio shows that used to do sci-fi before television existed. I live for that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So in America where I live, you can go to like a Walmart or whatever, and they'll have these big cases of like 100 movies for $20. And it's all in like one DVD, and they're all like crappy sci-fis, like Attack of the 50-Foot Gia Monster and, I Was a Teenage Weremole and weird things like that. And this was just one of them that was in one of those big packs one time. I was just so strucken by it, and I just instantly connected. I was like, oh my God, this is Alien. This is fucking Alien right here. And I love this. So no, this was not a childhood pick by any means whatsoever. I think only honestly, probably in the last 4 or 5 years.
Interesting. Again, I guessed wrong. Just like the daughter favorite.
It's okay.
I briefly want to just point at the fact that despite me not loving the story, I still think there's quite some interesting parts of the story. Like there's some philosophical implications the concept leads to, and I like that it's not just a straight up story, but it has some deeper meaning to it all, and they try to do something else with it using that story.
I think that brings us to your third film, which is 1985's Mishima, A Life in Four Chapters, a biographical film that uses its own subjects' written stories as vignettes to weave a fantastic life into film. While not always the most coherent or straightforward story, it is undeniable that the movie's absolutely epic soundtrack and gorgeous shots make it a powerful watch. I wish I had a lot more to say on exactly how I feel about this movie. I freshly watched it minutes before we started this podcast, so I haven't really had a lot of time to ruminate on it and develop a lot of thoughts and feelings. But damn, is the music emotion evoking. From the moment the guy is getting ready and putting on his gear and stuff, that music is just swelling and rising, and it's absolutely gorgeous.
I love that the music is the one thing that really struck out to you, because it definitely, next to cinematography and set design, which are incredible in this movie, the music by Philip Glass is definitely the reason I wanted to talk about this movie. Since we already talked about one of the directors I love and one of the writers I love, I wanted to talk about Philip Glass, the composer, and my favorite composer of all time. Yeah, this soundtrack is in my regular playlists. Like, there's many songs of this that I will put on in the car when I need some additional inspiration on the way to work and haven't found the energy quite yet to really get myself up there. It's just sounds that...
Yeah, this is some shit to brush your teeth to and really get going.
Yeah.
this is you put this as an alarm clock and you're just gonna wake up with purpose for no reason.
Yeah.
You're not wrong, though. The visuals of this movie, too, are really fantastic. And I think for me, especially, the movie kind of, it fires quickly. It goes quickly and it fizzles for me a little bit. But that first entire Golden Pavilion set is so fantastic. And I don't usually like to call movies dreamlike or say that they hit a dreamlike note. I usually think that's kind of cheesy in movies when they try to make things seem like a dream or seem otherworldly. But this really fit that. That whole Golden Pavilion set was just really fucking cool. Felt like it was out of a, out of a dream.
Yeah. Yeah, this is one thing I always love about movies is when they provide me with a unique experience. And I think this movie is definitely singular out there. There's movies that relate to it in wild set design, in somewhat abstract storytelling, in obviously epic soundtracks. But the way I experienced this movie is just unlike I experienced any other story. It also helps and fits perfectly into the way it is shot, that the base story, the actual story of the life of Mishima, is just maybe the craziest life a single person has ever lived. I don't know. One of the key parts of experiencing this movie, in my opinion, is the Googling afterwards, which you obviously didn't have time to do in this instance. And before we started the recording, you briefly mentioned that you thought parts of this were fictional, which absolutely makes sense. That's, I think, the experience most people have going out of this movie, that they are like, yeah, that...
I would say, you even start with that Golden Pavilion scene,
yeah.
That sets this tone of it's not, of this world, of this earth. So I just kind of thought that was going with it, but you're not wrong. His experiences are so varied and so magnanimous that this must be something he sat down and wrote and just came up with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the contrary is really the case. Like, if you, after this movie, start to Google around and read up on the life of Mishima, it's just a constant it's just a constant kick of dopamine really in your brain, finding more and more details that happened in this movie and actually finding out that they really happened in his life. Like, it's kind of insane to really think that one person lived through all of this, but apparently he did. And it makes perfect sense that you would try to tell this insane story in such an insane audiovisual way. It perfectly fits the source material. One more thing that I think is super interesting about this is that this is a Paul Schrader movie. I don't know how familiar you are with Paul Schrader, but he's mostly known for example, writing Taxi Driver. He's known as a guy who does gritty, very realistic movies, mostly about men that are not really functional all that much in society.
The lonely man stories.
Exactly. The literally me kind of Joker-esque stories out there. And this movie, whilst yes being about a man that kind of didn't fit into society, is just such a big step back from the general work Paul Schrader does, that going into this, I would have just never expected what was to come. And I honestly didn't think that Paul Schrader would have it in him to make a movie like this one. This feels more like, I don't know, a Jodorowsky project that he did after The Holy Mountain or something like that, than it does like a Paul Schrader movie. But I love that he has that craft in him. And I think way higher of him now than I did before I watched this the first time.
I mean, on the flip side of that, I thought this was it's a very Japanese story.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously set in Japan. All the actors are Japanese. The movie's filmed in Japanese. This felt like just a very core to Japan story, which I fully and 100% expected to be being told by a Japanese person, because of the care and because of the respect to the art in the sets and in the clothing and in the designs, in the respect of seppuku, what they're harakiri, what they're performing throughout parts of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
It's really fantastic that he pulled this off with the amount of respect that he did. I was really surprised. I was really surprised on the flip side to see that it wasn't a Japanese guy or lady.
Yeah, I heard the sentence before that people call this a Japanese film, even though it's a Paul Schrader movie. And I think that already says a lot if you can really embed yourself in a different culture to the degree where it feels like it was born within that culture.
That makes perfect sense. I think I want to see it again eventually soon. I want to be able to really sit on it for a while, because it's also fairly long.
Yeah.
And it's a lot. There's a lot of story happening in this movie, and it is told in these sections that make it almost a little hard to follow, if you're not really in it for the long haul on the movie. Mm-hmm. But I really want to give it a second try, because I really like what I saw and what I really gathered from it.
I guess that brings us to the final movie we're gonna briefly talk about today, which, interestingly enough, is a Japanese movie, and it was released in the very same year, 1985. Tampopo, a comedy film, I'd say, that feels at least 10 years younger than it is. It parodies, among other things, the Italo-Western genre, also known as the Spaghetti Western, where the joke here clearly is that it is a ramen Western instead. It has a great understanding of genre tropes, but also plays with cultural cliches, as well as breaking with structure, both in society and, to a degree, with structure in film. It is a film about cooking, about eating, and generally about enjoying life.
Yeah, it's a great way to put it. It's a film about love, I think, in its biggest core. The love of cooking, the love of life, and the love of a woman that makes noodles. The love of her husband in the job that he did and wanting to keep that business going. This movie is, to me, in a lot of ways, the embodiment of love and care and joy. I think this movie has a lot to say. It also has its own little vignettes, which is also really funny. We have these random cutaway scenes. Probably one of my favorites is the big group of people and they're going to order all the food together and everybody's going to have the exact same thing except for the last guy who's going to go all out and just get whatever he wants, and everybody starts following suit with him. I love that, and I love the women trying to learn how to eat pasta with Italian etiquette, while the American man eats ramen with Japanese etiquette, and they all are like, no, let's do it that way. Let's do it the way that is love. Let's do it where we love the food and we eat the food in a way that we love it. This movie, I think, goes beyond comedy for me. Mm-hmm. This movie is a soul food for me.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. You already pointed a bit at the structural plays, like little games it plays, where we have a main storyline, but also it takes these little adventures out of the story to, tell little fun stories on the side. My personal favorite with that would be the sequence where a bunch of homeless people are kind of food critics and experts. That was just that was super hilarious to me. And I love how that sequence in particular kind of put into question what it means to live your life to the fullest. That was super interesting. There was an interesting experience I went through with this where oftentimes I wasn't too convinced by the setup of one of those sequences. And throughout it, I thought, yeah, okay, let's move on from this sketch. I'm not really into it at all. And kind of hoping for the next sequence to start, when all of a sudden they just went way overboard and went so insane with the concept that I absolutely didn't see coming, that it got me again. And I was laughing out loud when they did exactly that and got me in a way that I didn't expect them to. Yeah, it's an interesting experience that I didn't really have like that before in film.
It definitely works to subvert your expectations sometimes, this movie, which is fun because, it's kind of one of the reasons that I chose it. So far for me, tonight we've had, super classic sci-fi silly movie, Planet of the Vampires, super modern silly sci-fi horror, Psycho Goreman. And then while Tampopo is a fairly silly film, it is definitely the most artistic and art housey artistic, not creatively artistic necessarily. It's just the opposite spectrum of that, and I feel like most people wouldn't expect this to be a Devon core film.
Yeah, yes, me too. Throughout the film, I was oftentimes kind of surprised that this would be one of the 3 movies you pick. But yeah, just hearing you talk about all the sensibilities you enjoy, I definitely get that. This movie definitely has some aspects where it's kind of crazy how sensitive it can be with weird ideas. I'm not gonna spoil the full content of that sequence, but there's the sequence in the movie involving an egg. That is a very sensual scene.
Yeah.
And yeah, just looking at that, I kind of couldn't believe how well it works as a sensual romantic scene whilst being the scene it is, really. It's, that's kind of crazy that works, but it does. I love when films manage to overcome ridiculousness and tell actual emotions with that. That was some of my favorites of the film.
It's one of my favorite things in any type of story when you can take a just outlandish, bizarre idea and play it straight-faced long enough for the audience to fall in the world. and to like accept it and just be like, no, yeah, this is the reality. And even though it was ridiculous 5 seconds ago, now I'm fully invested.
Mm-hmm.
I really love that in all movies and all stories. And this, yeah, you're right. This one does that really, really well. I'm happy you liked it. I was nervous, to be really honest.
Yeah, I didn't like love it. I had some problems with it. The structure with all those little side stories didn't fully catch me. I wish it would have maybe stuck to the main storyline more. I'm not sure what exactly it was that didn't convince me fully, but I definitely enjoyed it a lot. It's an interesting movie, and I don't regret checking it out, for sure.
Very cool.
The only remaining point on the agenda is to inform you guys, our cinematic patients, about your responsibilities till our next appointment 2 weeks from now.
Your very first prescription is Sidney Lumet's 1957 debut film 12 Angry Men, a courtroom drama that never actually sees the inside of a courtroom. This adaptation of a live TV play follows the deliberation of a heated jury room and is often considered a quintessential in its genre.
The second film on your prescription is the 2023 French film Anatomie d'une chute, Anatomy of a Fall, which in many ways is a courtroom drama in its own regards, despite having its focus on many other things. It is directed by Justin Triet and features the German actress Sandra Hüller in an astonishing performance. It also won this year's main award at the Cannes Film Festival, the Palme d'Or, and is one of my favorite films of the year so far. If you don't want to get spoiled for these films, make sure to watch them by the next episode. I'm George.
I'm Devin, and this was your dose of Medicinema.